Well, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. This is Steve Van Houten, President, CEO of Lifetime Financial Advisors. And today I'm proud to announce a presentation on Social Security, which we find through our practice, talking to clients all day long, one of the most misunderstood, but actually the most predictable retirement strategy. So today joining us is one of our good partners, Tim Miller from BlackRock, who will be reviewing some Social Security strategies, the questions you always wanted to ask. And there'll be plenty of time to ask your questions. So we encourage all those questions that are burning to raise your hand. Luke will review that in a minute. And this should be a great time together. So Tim, thank you for joining us today and sharing your expertise.
Awesome. And I think given the nature of this discussion with a lot of case studies and individual opportunities for review, I think we're going to open up Q&A along the way. We'll still have questions and answers after the presentation, but also along the way, we're going to be monitoring the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. So if you want to ask a question to Tim along the way, hit that raise hand button. We'll prompt you to unmute your line to be able to ask a question and go from there. Tim, thank you for your partnership, all of the just the intellectual leadership that you and your entire team bring to the table, and partnering with us, not just across portfolios, but also within financial planning and some of these wealth management strategies. So I will turn the call over to Tim. Thank you so much for your time, everybody, and let's have a great presentation.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Steve, Brian. Thanks to the entire Lifetime Financial Advisors team for inviting me to be a part of this, and happy Thursday. Good afternoon. And let me just do a quick check. Can you see, Steve, maybe a thumbs up that we can see me moving my screen and everything's good on
it looks good,
technology?
Tim.
Okay,
I'll practice raising my hand.
I see it. I see that you raised your hand. I will do my best to call on folks as we go, and we're going to do this live. Here we go. I like everybody's non-visual version. Brian, you look good, and you look good in real life too. So everybody checks out. All right, listen. Happy Thursday. Really excited about this. Just trying to get a smile out of you there, Brian. We're going to get into this topic. We're going to get into it in some detail. I personally like this topic. Normally, I guess you could say in non-COVID times, we do a lot of these in person, but of course, I think COVID ushered in the Zoom era. And, I think there are some benefits to this type of format, not the least of which is you don't have to take multiple hours out of your day. You can log in for 30 or 45 minutes and hopefully get the most out of this in order to make the right decision for you, or at least to give yourself the right questions to ask to your advisor at Lifetime Financial in order to make the right decision for you. So we always appreciate the opportunity to talk about this and to help folks. And, I think it's especially relevant in a period like this because, when like we've experienced for most of the last decade plus, markets are going up seemingly every year with less volatility than, of course, we're living through right now. I think sometimes people move Social Security in their mind to kind of the back corner of their financial plan. But when you've got a government guaranteed income stream that also has, by the way, inflation adjustments along with it, well, all of a sudden the primacy and the importance of that is moved right to the front burner, especially if you're near the decision around when you want to start collecting benefits. So we're going to get into how you become eligible to collect benefits, the different types of benefits that you can get, something called your primary insurance amount, spousal benefits, survival benefits. We're going to talk a little bit about divorce. I promise I'll try to make that more fun than it probably is in real life. And Luke made me promise to have you all out of here in time for dinner time. So what is that, 6 or 6:30? No, my part should probably be, like I said, 30 to 45 minutes. And we'll try to make it fun. I'll try to crack a few cheesy jokes along the way to spice it up, because sometimes Social Security is not that interesting, and I promise we'll try to do our best to make it so. Now, as I like to ease into this presentation. I also like to show a little bit about my family. We have 3 young children. These are 2 of them, Isabella in the foreground, Charlotte on the left. I bring these girls up for a specific reason, not as a shameless plug to show you my kids, but we have a younger son too named Noah. He's 1. But because almost every single night I read him bedtime stories, and lately we've been doing a lot of Shel Silverstein. And if you know Shel Silverstein, you know he's got a number of poems, but he wrote Where the Sidewalk Ends. One of the most famous poems in that is a poem called Smart. And Smart is written from the perspective of a 5 or a 6-year-old boy. And it goes like this. My dad gave me a dollar bill because I'm his smartest son. I traded it for 2 shiny quarters because 2 is more than 1. And then the way the poem goes, he trades the 2 quarters for 3 dimes, 3 dimes for 4 nickels, and 4 nickels for 5 pennies. And it actually, it's kind of a dark finish, right? The dad is like speechless, right? He goes, how could you do this? And the boy's kind of proud because, you know, to him, 5 pennies might be more fun or cooler or more interesting than a green piece of paper that's a dollar bill. Of course, the purpose of that is to show the kid the value of a dollar and money in general. But you might be thinking to yourself, and you'd be forgiven for thinking this, what on earth does this have to do with Social Security? And to me, what this poem says is money does not come with an instruction manual, right? And so from a perspective of a 5 or a 6-year-old boy, 5 pennies might be more cool or more interesting than a dollar bill. But nowhere is that more true than with the program that we call Social Security. This is a system that if you're on this call, you're probably been playing into your entire working lives, yet you didn't even hear anything from the government about it until the late 1990s. Remember when they used to send statements 3 months before your birthday? And even when they sent you the statement, it was nothing about strategy. It was, here's how long you've worked, as if you needed a reminder. And here's what your benefits are going to be if when you retire at your full retirement age. And then if you flip a few pages later, it's, oh yeah, by the way, if we don't do anything about this system, it's going to run out of money by 2030 something. And it's not going to run out, by the way. It might change in some way, shape, or form. And I will talk about that a little bit later on. But I will say this presentation is mostly about this system as it exists today and how you can capitalize on it and make the most of it for your particular situation. Okay, so we're going to get right into it. Next slide. This is, I feel like, almost like an obligatory slide in, I don't want to say financial services, but when you look at all of the people in the United States today, and especially if I were to draw your attention to the bottom line, for a healthy couple age 65, they've got a pretty good chance of at least one of them living nearly 3 decades, well into their 90s. Yet when we look at everybody collecting Social Security benefits today, you find that nearly 2/3 of Americans are collecting reduced benefits. And now what's interesting about this is that reduction in benefits is actually a permanent reduction in benefits. Now, we're not here to say that everybody should delay collecting as long as possible or shouldn't collect early. You should make the decision that's right for you, and that may be, by the way, taking benefits early. But what we find is that, and I've done hundreds of these presentations both in person and on Zoom, what we find is that there are 2 big statements that I hear a lot. One, I don't trust the government. I think the system's going to run out of money and I'm going to get while the getting's good. I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. The other reason why people take benefits early is because they don't think that they have longevity on their side. People almost always have a more negative view of their own life expectancy than they probably should if they were to think through it, I guess you could say logically. People are emotional about things like that. But in any case, 2/3 of people are collecting benefits early. And probably the final reason, just to be fair, is because they need to. I mean, there's no surprise, probably among many of you on this call, if you work with Lifetime Financial, then you've probably done a nice job saving and building that nest egg. But probably a lot of people in this country are taking benefits at 62 or whatever because they need to. They don't have any other options. So that's part of it too. Now, we're gonna kind of unpack some of this and get into some of the rules and some of the basics. Most of you are probably aware that in order to become eligible for Social Security benefits, you have to work at least 10 years. And really, what the Social Security Administration really counts as credits, and you can earn up to 4 credits per year. So you need 40 credits really to become eligible to receive a benefit at all. In other words, If you worked 9.5 years and you only got 38 credits, for example, you would receive nothing in Social Security benefits on your own record. In which case, by the way, my first recommendation might be go back to work for 6 months and earn just enough money to get a benefit, because it's probably the difference between nothing for the rest of your life and $500 or $600 or maybe $700 a month, depending on what those 10 years look like in terms of earnings for you. The other interesting statistic on the 10 years of the credits, the 40 credits really, is each credit has a dollar value assigned to it. That dollar value is indexed for inflation. This year it's $1,510, and $1,505 perhaps, but just slightly over $1,500 per credit. So theoretically, you could earn a little over $6,000 in a day, one day, the first day of the year even, and earn all four of your credits for that year. Okay, so really, if somebody had 38 credits, the correct way to advise them, if this is you on the call, would be you need to earn about $3,000 to become eligible to take benefits. I think we can go out and do that. Just a quick aside: if you are one of those people out there making $6,000 in a day, and it's legal, feel free to ping me afterwards. I'd love to hear what you're up to. These are the kinds of things, by the way, on Zoom that you hope people are laughing at or at least getting a chuckle at, that you just can't hear for sure. So far so good on questions. We're going to keep moving on. So how do they actually calculate your benefits? So this is a sample of a statement, and I'm just going to bring it all up here. What they actually do is they take your best 35 years of work history. They index the older years for inflation to bring them to present day dollars. And interestingly enough, if you worked 45 years, for example, they would still take your best 35 years. If you worked 30 years, they would give you all 30 of the years you worked in 5 zeros, okay? And they come up with something called your average index monthly earnings, and off of which they create your primary insurance amount. That is the amount that you get at what they call your full retirement age. I'm going to talk more about this on the next slide. There are a couple of reasons to remember the website ssa.gov. Okay, that's the Social Security Administration's website, ssa.gov. And the first reason is these earnings statements that you see on the left-hand side, the best 35 years portion of this screen, the administration admits that up to 10% of the earnings numbers that they have on record do not match W-2 reported earnings to the IRS. Interestingly enough, the government doesn't know everything. So the first reason to go out there is to double check the earnings that you reported versus what you see in your statement. And you should especially do this as you approach your retirement years. If you find something and you find it within the last 3 years, you can correct it. It's much more difficult to do so if it's, say, like 1996, there was a big discrepancy. And of course, you probably want to make that call if it's underreporting what you earned. If it's overreporting what you earned, I'll leave it up to you. That's the first reason. The second reason to go out to the website is to potentially estimate how changes in your future earnings are going to impact your Social Security benefits. So the reason I say this is, let's just say, for example, that this is Steve Van Houten's statement. And let's just say it was $2,000 a month that he was going to receive. In order to get that $2,000 a month, it is assuming that Steve is going to make every year until he reaches his full retirement age what he made last year. Now, if there are meaningful variations in Steve's income year in and year out, that would impact the future benefits. In other words, if the income years between now and when he hits full retirement age are lower than what his income was last year, it stands to reason that his benefit's not going to be $2,000, it's actually be a little less than $2,000. So I say this because there's a tool on the website that you can go out to and utilize in order to plug in future earnings estimates and how that might change your Social Security benefits as you would actually receive them. Okay, so 2 reasons to go out there. 1, check your earnings at least once a year. Probably that's all you need to do, is you should go out there once a year. And then the other is to, if your earnings do fluctuate wildly, or perhaps you had a down year last year, or maybe you had a really nice year last year, but it's not normal in either case, then you can estimate what future earnings would do to your future Social Security benefits. Okay. Now, we're going to get into some more basics here. I just put everything up on this screen because we're going to unpack this, and I'm going to start kind of on the bottom. So this is where I'll talk a little bit about the history of the Social Security Administration and the health or the viability of the system. So I would also normally ask for audience participation here, which will be a little harder to do on Zoom. So what I'll do is I will assume that you are answering that when I ask you, how do you think they came up with the age of 65 when Social Security first started in the early 1930s as a response to the Great Depression? And I would imagine that your answer was, well, that's how long people lived. And that's true. The life expectancy of the average American in 1935 was about 65, 64 and a half years old. But what happened was in the early 1980s, 1983 to be specific, they said for everybody who, at that age was between 30 and 40 years old, instead of your full retirement age being 65, it's now 66. And if you were born 1960 and later, it's not 65 or 66, it's actually 67. This was enough to shore up the system for another 3 or 4 decades. Because, by the way, if there were statements in the early 80s and they showed that third page of, if we do nothing to the system, you kind of know how that line goes if you've ever looked at the statement. If we do nothing to the system, then we will have to curtail benefits in the year 2031. I think that's what it says this year. The same would have been true in 1983. It would have said we will have to curtail benefits in 1991, 8 years later, for example. And by extending the full retirement age for people who at the time were in their 20s to 40s, meaning people who were between 25 and 40 years away from collecting benefits, if they were to change full retirement age 1 year out, it shores up the system by decades. And I'm spending a minute on this because people are worried. People, especially people who are approaching this decision in the near term, are worried about the viability and the future of the system. Okay. And I'm telling you, if you are between 5 and 15 years from collecting Social Security, like in other words, if this is a fairly imminent decision for you, or 0 to 15 years, I should say, you should have nothing to worry about. The system will exist largely in the state that has been presented to you for your entire working career. The most likely precedent for how they will change it in the future is what they did in 1983, which is extending the full retirement age. Now, as it happens, I don't mind dating myself. I'm 35 years old. As it happens, there are probably some of you on this call that were born 1960 or later. We have the same full retirement age. I highly doubt that my full retirement age remains 67 by the time I get to be 67. But nevertheless, that's what it is right now based on the rules. So that's the first thing they'll do. The second thing they'll do is raise the FICA tax. The FICA tax is the tax that you pay that funds the Social Security program. It's taxed on the first $140,000 or so of income, and it's a 6.2% tax rate on the employee and also on the employer side of things. That rate hasn't changed for at least a decade, I think even longer than that. If they do either of these things, let alone a combination of these things, even if they were to raise the FICA tax at 0.5% on both sides, employee and employer, by our math at BlackRock, it shores the system up for at least another 50 years, perhaps longer. Okay. So I wanted to share that with you. I wanted to spend a little time on that because I wanted to give you some confidence that if you take benefits early, the reason should not be because you want to get while the getting's good and you think that it's just the well is going to run dry. This is not that type of thing. If there's anything that the United States government has proven to us, it's that they can really kind of stretch things out until they absolutely have to do something. And that's probably what they'll do here with Social Security. Now, moving to the top half of this chart. The full retirement age is an important age, and we've just talked about what that age means. And it is the age at which your primary insurance amount is paid to you. Now, this is an important age also because it is the age off of which any reductions in benefits are applied or increases in benefits are applied, depending on if you collect early or if you collect late. Now, that's right. There can be reductions in benefits. In other words, if your full retirement age is 67, which for a lot of people it will be, who might be approaching this decision in the next couple of years, or maybe 66 in a few months. If it's 67 though, and you collect at 62, you will have reduced benefits. And the question is how much? And the answer is it depends. So you collect as early as age 62, which would be 5 years prior to the full retirement age of age 67, you would have a 30% reduction in benefits, which is not good. I mean, last I checked, I call that a pay cut. You know, these are benefits that are owed to me based on my working history, et cetera. I think of that as a pay cut. Before I take a pay cut in any area, I want to make sure that I'm asking myself the right questions. And so kind of from the bottom up here, number one, are you married? So many people make the Social Security collection decision in isolation. They think about it just solely like, I have worked, I will get my benefits. You need to think of this, I would strongly encourage you to think of this as a joint decision with your spouse, okay? And the reason is because, and we're going to see some hypothetical examples later, but if one person's benefit is $1,000 a month and the other person's benefit is $3,000 a month, big difference in benefits, right? And let's say the $1,000 a month person is younger than the $3,000 a month person by 10 years. Let's say it's a 60-year-old and a 70-year-old. The $3,000 a month person turns their benefits on. They waited, they got $3,000 a month, and then they die at 71. And they might be thinking, you know, I went with Lifetime Financial and I was on that webinar with Tim Miller from BlackRock convincing me to delay collecting benefits so they can get, I can get an increased benefit. And lo and behold, I did. And I died at 71. Maybe that's what that person's thinking at the pearly gates, or maybe in their final moment. And I would just remind that person, if I were in that final moment with them, I suppose, that their spouse, who instead of 71 is 61, their spouse could outlive them by 2-3 decades. I mean, if you're 61 years old, there's a decent chance you're living into your 80s or 90s. That could be 2 or 3 decades on this planet. And survivor benefits kick in for that person. We could be talking about $3,000 a month for that surviving spouse instead of $1,000 a month, which is what he or she would have had on their own record. So whether or not you're married matters a lot, number one. Number two, longevity, okay? If you have longevity on your side, all else being equal, it probably makes sense to wait if you can afford to, if it's part of your broader plan. I'm going to reference broader plan a fair bit here because I don't know your particular situations. You do. My guess is you've got that pretty well dialed with your advisor at Lifetime Financial, and as you should. If you've got longevity on your side, though, all else being equal in Social Security, it can pay to wait, okay? If, on the other hand, you don't, for whatever reason, that might play into your Social Security or your family Social Security collection decision as well, okay? So longevity matters as well. Number three is, are you actually working or are you actually retiring? A lot of people retire. They say, you know what, I'm going to be done at 64 years old. They do. They retire. And then all of a sudden, this is how it goes, right? They're home a little more. They're asking questions a little more. Why is this thing here and that thing there? And what project do we have to do today? Or what project am I being given to do today, perhaps? And all of a sudden, somebody gets asked to go out and find a part-time job. You go out and work a little bit more. And the Social Security Administration doesn't exactly like that. In other words, if you're collecting Social Security benefits early, the Social Security Administration assumes that you do not have other means of generating income. If you show to them that you do, there is a withholding scheme in place. This withholding scheme is indexed to inflation. This year, for any period of time prior to your full retirement age, okay, so under FRA, that's what FRA stands for, full retirement age. Any year, so I'm talking 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, for every dollar in excess of, every $2 in excess of $19,560, $1 of your Social Security benefits will be reduced. And when do you suppose they find this out? They find this out when you do your taxes. So it would actually be right about now. let's say that you retired at 62 and you were actually retired, okay? And then at 64, you're this person that's getting in the way at home, and you go out and get a part-time job and you start to make, you know, perhaps $50,000 or $60,000 a year. Maybe it's not a part-time job. Maybe it turns into a full-time job. In any case, you do your taxes in 2021, in April of 22. Social Security realizes you made too much money and you don't get that direct deposit on May 1st like you were expecting. They are going to withhold your benefits until you determine and prove to them that you're not making too much money. Okay, withholding scheme in place. This is working while collecting early. It's a little different the year you reach your full retirement age. The threshold's higher and it's 3-to-1, not 2-to-1. Okay, now this only applies if you collect benefits prior to full retirement age, not after. So once you reach your full retirement age, which again is a bit of a moving target, could be 66 in a few months up to 67. Once you reach your full retirement age, you can work, you can make as much as you want, and you are completely fine in Social Security's book. In fact, one final point here, if you continue working after full retirement age and you have earnings years that are better than the best 35 that I mentioned earlier is what your benefits are predicated on, then you can actually see an improvement to your benefits above and beyond what maybe cost of living adjustments would improve them by, interestingly enough. So I thought that was just an interesting fact. So you can actually improve your benefits while taking Social Security benefits. That feels a little bit like beating the system, and you can in fact do that. All right. Now let's just say that maybe you're on this call and you recently started your benefits and you're learning some of these things and you realize, you know what, maybe you are going to keep working, or maybe you didn't need to and you were one of those that wanted to get while the getting's good, or whatever it may be. You might ask what my 5-year-old would say, can I have a do-over? And the answer is maybe. So when problems like this come up, the federal government creates a form. And this form is called the Request for Withdrawal of Application. Okay? And really what you need to satisfy are 3 requirements. Number 1, you have to do this within the first year of having turned on your Social Security benefits. It used to be, by the way, that you could do this anytime. You could have turned your benefits on at 62, came to this presentation when you were 65, realized that you didn't even really need the money, but you did it because you were one of those that wanted to get while the getting's good or whatever. And no disrespect, that's all fine. But you realize that I didn't need it. I can pay it all back. You know, I've saved it or invested it or whatever. And you can pay it all back and restart your benefits at a later date at a higher number. Okay, they close that to just being within the first year, number 1. Number 2, it's a one-time only thing, so you can only do this once. I can't imagine why you'd probably need to do it more than once, but you can do it once. And then number 3, I alluded to this earlier, but you've got to pay all the benefits back. But that part's no good, and normally it's where you get tomatoes thrown at you, but since we're in a virtual Zoom room, I'm a little more protected from that. All of that to say, if you do this, if you pay it all back, if you do it in the first year, and you only do it once, you can restart your benefits at a higher rate, okay? So that's the Request for Withdrawal of Application. That is kind of all there is to know about reduced benefits. I'm just gonna pause and see if there are any questions. Feel free to use the raise hand function if there are questions, and I will try to call on you as I can. But otherwise, we're gonna keep moving along. Any questions? Okay. Let's keep going. So that's enough about reduced benefits. Let's talk about raises. Okay. So if you delay collecting your benefits, you get an increase. In fact, it works out to be 8% per year. It's actually fractions of a percent per month, technically speaking, but it works out to be 8% per year that you delay collecting your benefits. So if your benefit at full retirement age was $1,000 a month, it would turn into $1,240 a month if you waited until age 70. Which is, by the way, the latest possible age you would want to delay collecting benefits. In other words, you don't get another 8% for waiting until 71. Okay, so 70 is the highest it can go. Just a little FYI there. Now, there's this concept in Social Security around break-evens. A lot of people like to know, well, what's my break-even analysis? And it's a common question, and it's a fair question. And really what it alludes to is, well, if I collect benefits at age 62, and I just add those up, you know, the cumulative amount of the benefits that I received is in the orange line. But of course, if I waited until 67, yes, I'm starting later, so I'm going to start behind, right? But I'm going to get a bigger dollar amount. So eventually those lines will cross. And of course, 62 and 67, they cross at 78 and a half years old. Okay. Mathematically, they should always kind of work the same way. And then of course, if you wait until age 70, you'll have to live until about your early 80s in order for that to have paid off as a decision. But here's the thing. This only really applies to people who are single and never before married. Okay? If you're married, or even if you were formerly married, then when you collect could impact you in terms of break-even benefits, but it's also going to impact your spouse, or I suppose your ex-spouse, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Okay? So even if you, in other words, even if you die here and you're like, gosh, it would have been better off to wait till 60 or to do it at 67. Well, maybe not so much, you know. We talked about that a bit earlier, and so break-even points matter a lot if you're single. People will always want to know that, like, when should I start? And the easy answer is, I mean, tell me when you're going to die, and I'll tell you when to start collecting your Social Security benefits. It's a little curt to say it like that, but so many challenges or planning challenges in the financial services industry and in the planning industry could be solved for by just knowing that date. You know, but that would create a whole bunch of other challenges and probably anxiety as well. So be careful what you wish for. That's how I see it. So let's first kind of like unpack spousal, because you alluded to that, also survivor. But let's unpack spousal benefits first, and then we'll get into survivor and when that can happen. Okay. So I've alluded to this concept of spousal benefits. Let's say in this first hypothetical example, so we've got John and Jane. You know, we're really creative at hypothetical names here at BlackRock. But let's say based on John's best 35 years of work history, he's getting $2,200 a month. And, you know, let's say in this case, Jane was one of those who, you know, maybe she, for a portion of life, she was by far doing the harder job based on what I observe at home of raising the kids. And then she went back and did some part-time work, but didn't get 40 quarters. Maybe she got 39 credits. We get to make up our own hypothetical stuff here, right? But in any case, she doesn't have a benefit. My first recommendation to her might be go back and earn a couple $1,000s and get that benefit, because it's probably the difference between $0 and $500 or $600 a month, maybe more. Anyway, so spousal benefits, what can they be? It's 50% of the primary earner's primary insurance amount. So in this case, half at $2,200 is $1,100 a month. Now, Jane cannot get spousal benefits until John collects his own benefit, in this case, John. By the way, you could reverse the names. It doesn't matter, male or female, who the primary earner is or secondary, whether that person is male or female, just an FYI. But it does matter when John collects. It matters more that he collects than when he collects for spousal. For survivor, it matters when he collects. I'll talk about that again in a minute. But if John goes in as early as possible and gets that 30% reduction, he's getting $1,540 a month. But if Jane waits to collect spousal at her full retirement age, she'll get $1,100 a month, okay, which is still the full half of $2,200. Now, I mentioned earlier that if your own benefits, if you collect them early, they're reduced. Well, the same is true with spousal benefits. If you collect them early, they can be reduced, but by a slightly different reduction amount. So instead of 70% or a 35% reduction, I should say, it's 65% or 35%, I should say. So previously it was a 30% reduction. Now it's 35 in the case of spousal. And unlike when you get your own benefits later, they increase. That's not the case with spousal benefits. So the most that they can be is 50% of the primary earner's primary insurance amount. Okay, so in this case, earlier that I showed you, $1,100 a month. Now, this shows you, by the way, if John collects as late as possible, they're still $1,100 a month. Now, what I want to do here is slightly change the scenario. Let's say that Jane did go back to work for a couple of quarters, let's say, and she gets now $600 a month. So what happens with spousal benefits? And the answer is they piece it together. I'm just going to put all of this up there and it will make some sense. I will explain this and how it makes sense. Let's focus on the middle column first. So in the orange is Jane's own benefit, $600 per month. she's going to get what's called an adjusted spousal benefit. Effectively, by the way, she's only going to get one deposit or one check. It's a direct deposit now, but she's going to get $1,100. That's what she's going to get. But this is how it actually works. So they know she's getting $1,100, $600 from her own, $500 from spousal. And this is also how they piece together the actual reductions or increases, okay? So remember I said earlier, if you delay collecting, you get at 8% per year. Well, from 67 to 70, that's 24% or $744 instead of $600. And if I said if you reduced your own benefit and you collect as early as possible, that's a 30% reduction, right? So that's 420 instead of 600. Now, it is also from this number that reductions can happen with spousal, the adjusted amount. So remember I mentioned that 35% from earlier. It is really 35% off of the 500 or 325. So we're kind of splitting the difference really, but she still caps out at 1,100. Hopefully that makes sense. Sometimes this is where people can start to have questions. So if you do, feel free, and we will add you as a speaker to ask that. But hopefully that's clear. So the most that spousal benefits can be are 50% of the primary earner's amount, and they can go down. They're not going to be higher than 1,100 in this case. Okay. Now let's talk about survivor benefits, because this is important. And I think this chart on the left kind of shows why it's important. In other words, if we look at the country today, over half of the women who are collecting Social Security benefits today are collecting based on their own record only. Slightly less than half are collecting either only based on a husband's or ex or deceased husband's record, or in part on their own and on their husband's record. Okay. And by the way, I've been doing this presentation for about a decade, and it used to be the other way. It used to be slightly less than half collected on their own benefit only. So this is actually, really, I think it's a sign of the times and the kind of the changing demographic nature of the workforce in the United States. And I would imagine you see more orange over time. But in any case, I say all of this because when John collects, in this case anyway, matters for Jane's survivor benefits. So let's say that John is one of those that, in spite of listening to my presentation, he says, we need to go in and collect benefits early. So he goes in at like 64 and a half years old, and it's going to be a reduced benefit, $1,833 per month. And if he is involved in a bizarre bus accident and dies shortly thereafter, what is Jane going to get? She's going to get $1,833 per month, because she's going to get what he turned his benefits on as, okay, which is $1,833. If instead he waited until age 70, he's going to get the 24% increase. And then if he passes away shortly thereafter, surprisingly or unsurprisingly, she's going to step up to $2,728 per month from $600 a month, by the way. And so we're talking about nearly $1,000 increase per month by them waiting. And, if they were both the same age, Jane, very reasonable possibility that Jane could live another 20 years, and that $1,000 a month could be a big, big deal for her. So in other words, like this is why we kind of encourage or nudge folks to waiting a bit, and B, why you have to think of it as a kind of a joint life thing and not just individually on your own record. Now, I want to take a minute here and pause for what I call station identification. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, listening to the Reds on AM radio, and they would always say that. We're going to do a pause for station identification. Just a little breather. Feel free to grab a water or coffee or something, maybe your favorite beverage. We're getting to that hour. I'm going to tell you that we're going to go through some various collection strategies and scenarios, okay? And I know what you're going to be thinking. You're going to be thinking about your own situation. You're going to be thinking about, well, these numbers are a little different than mine. My name's Steve and her name's Linda, for example, not John and Jane. Everything's going to be different. And in my experience, it can be confusing to be thinking about yours and the examples I'm showing. And I say this because I would hope that you can just stick with me and just kind of try to follow along and try to really understand what we're going through. Because just know this, there's a fantastic set of resources that the folks at Lifetime Financial have available to them starting with their own knowledge, but also tools that BlackRock makes available in terms of Social Security benefits estimator systems, as well as for difficult to answer questions, minor children, railroad benefits, government pension offset, things like that, anything related to pensions. We have a Q&A service that used to, staffed by people who used to work at Social Security Administration. All they do is answer tough questions on Social Security within 24 hours. So think about your own situation, sure, but really try to follow along here in this next 5 or 10 minutes as we wrap up and go through the scenarios. And I promise, I think you'll come away with a far better understanding of it. All right. So let's start this out by just kind of setting the table. So John is going to live through age 75, Jane through 84. John gets $2,200 a month. Jane gets $600 a month. We're going to say, what if they go in as early as possible? What if they wait till full retirement age? What if they wait as long as possible? Okay. So in this first scenario, they're going to go in at 62 and say, you know what? I don't trust the government. I'm going to get while the getting's good. Of course, they're going to have reductions in benefits, $1,540 a month. We've seen that number before because that's a 30% reduction. $420 a month, which is 30% off of $600, and then of course $325, that adjusted spousal amount. And you know, Jane's going to outlive John by 9 years, and all told, they're going to get just under $580,000, which last I checked was a lot of money. Now, in scenario number 2, at the age of 67, he's getting $2,200. She's getting $600 plus $500, which equals, that's right, $1,100. And the number goes up, $594,000. Now, what do you suppose happens if they wait until age 70? This is, again, where I would take audience participation, but we can't do that. Many people would suspect that the number goes higher yet still by waiting until 70. Of course, because John gets an increased benefit of 24%, so does Jane, but again, she's only getting $1,100 total, $744 plus $356. And look at this, the number goes down. It's actually the worst of what we've seen so far, which reinforces the point of what you might be thinking, like, why would I wait when I don't know for sure what my final day on earth is going to be? And you can't know for sure. So what we tried to do at BlackRock is we tried to think about, well, what is there a combination of scenarios? Is there a strategy? Is there some thinking we could do, at least with an example like this? And there often are parallels to examples like for those of you on this call. Is there some strategy we can apply that produces the best outcome regardless of life expectancy? In other words, whether it's 75 and 84, which I would argue is not very optimistic, or whether they live to be much older. And the answer is, of course, yes. So in this final scenario, big difference in benefits, you've got Jane. She goes in as early as possible. She takes $420 a month. It's a 30% reduction, right? And then nothing happens for 8 years or so. And John's going to let his grow as much as possible, but because she can't take spousal until he files, once he files, she can take then $500 a month. That adjusted spousal amount is actually going to be bigger, okay? The most it'll be is 500, which is, of course, is that portion of the 1,100, or what would otherwise be the 1,100. And you look at this, you add up that whole strategy with this life expectancy and whatnot, and you get nearly $600,000. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, I went through that pretty quickly, and it's only about $5,000 more than, maybe $6,000 more than just going straight down the middle, right? Collect at 67 and call it a day. But I would remind you that this example assumes that they're not living very long. So let's change the numbers for a minute. Instead of 75 and 84, let's do 85 and 92, which I just switched over. And look at how the numbers explode. So instead of 579,000, you get 810,000 cumulatively if you go at 62, 937,000 at full retirement age, 964 at age 70, and 969, almost $970,000 if you apply just a little bit of strategy. Okay, so this is why, by the way, I think people still care. I mean, it's a lot of money at the end of the day, and it's a very meaningful part of a sound and well put together financial plan, especially so, again, during times of volatility. Covering those basic needs with guaranteed income streams is really, really important. So hopefully that all made sense. That's a very big part of the strategy. If you want to see how that applies to your situation, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to Luke, Brian, or Steve at Lifetime Financial to see if that makes sense for you. In fact, I would, yeah, I think that's probably the most important takeaway that you can have. Now I'm going to come back to survivor benefits. I'm going to try to piece this together here. We're going to finish with survivor one more time, divorce and taxes, and then we'll land the plane. I know what time it is. I know we got to kind of pick it up. All right. So in this case, Chris has a full retirement age primary insurance amount of $2,200 a month. Chris is widowed, and she's entitled to $2,500 a month in survivor benefits. Now, remember I said earlier that under normal circumstances, the youngest that you can collect benefits is age 62. Under normal circumstances, when there's a death, in this case, like there is, you can take survivor benefits as early as age 60. So a good strategy here for Chris might be to take survivor benefits as early as age 60. Of course, she couldn't turn her own benefits on that early. And she's going to have a reduction, $1,788 instead of $2,500 a month. But $2,500 a month is the most that they would be. They're kind of locked in at the survivor benefit amount starting point. So they're going to be reduced. But then look what she could do. She could let her own benefit grow from $2,200 a month to $2,728, and then switch over to her own at the age of 70. And of course, if she applies a strategy like this, she's going to, again, highly maximize benefits versus the alternative. And we're talking about a couple $100,000 of cumulative benefit difference by applying a bit of strategy. Okay, let's land this plane. Let's talk about divorce. Let's try to make it fun, even though it's probably not. Spousal benefits. Our spousal and survivor benefits both are entitled to your ex-husband or ex-wife, okay? So that may dismay some people on this call, or maybe some people that you know. And even if, by the way, I'd say this, even if this doesn't apply to you, it applies to somebody you know, and you could probably earn yourself a nice dinner or something by telling a good friend about this. But here's the deal. If you were married for at least 10 years, currently unmarried, and you're both at least 62 years old, your ex-spouse or ex-husband could be eligible for, ex-wife or ex-husband could be eligible for benefits off of your record. Okay, let's bring this to life, real life, well, not real life example. Final hypothetical couple of the afternoon, Larry and Mary. We've been giving John all the credit. So let's say that Mary is a very successful entrepreneur. She maxed out Social Security benefits her entire life. She's due to receive let's call it $3,000 a month. Larry, on the other hand, at the register here, there's no Larrys on the call. That's good. Larry was a deadbeat. Larry barely worked a day in his life. The Social Security Administration barely knows who this guy is. And he comes to one of these Zoom webinars, and he learns about all these rules. And then he goes down to Social Security and he says, I heard about this thing called spousal benefits. I want to see if I can get something for nothing, because that's how Larry rolls. And they said, well, were you married 10 years? And he shows his marriage certificate and his divorce decree. And he says, yes. He says, are you currently unmarried? And he goes, yep, nobody else will have me. And I'm 62 years old. And they said, well, stamp, you get spousal benefits. Here's the thing, remember I said earlier, in order to get spousal when you're married, the other one has to at least file. And in divorce situations, Mary doesn't even have to have filed for benefits. She just has to be at least 62 years old. And the way I read that is they're just assuming that you're not talking, right? Now, let's play this out a little bit further. Let's say that Mary gets remarried to John from earlier, not based on his numbers, but just to use a name that we're familiar with. Both Larry and John could take spousal benefits off of Mary's record. So let's say it was $3,000 a month. That means Larry and John both could get $1,500 a month off of her record. And of course, the real life example of that in history anyway would be Johnny Carson. I believe he was married to 3 different women for 10 years each and died married to a 4th. All 4 of those women could take survivor benefits off of Johnny Carson's record, interestingly enough. I had one person one time say, that's why the system's going broke. Everybody's getting divorced. And everybody's collecting benefits off of each other. So anyway, the other side of this coin would be, well, what if Larry, who was the ex-spouse of Mary, what if he remarries? let's say he remarries Jane from earlier. What happens to his ability to take spousal benefits off of Mary's record? He loses it, at least as long as he's married to Jane. Now, if Larry was married to Jane for at least 10 years and then she finally catches on to, you know, the type of guy he is, I suppose, and they get divorced, then Larry once again has the option to take Mary's or Jane's spousal benefit. It's actually not a choice. It would be the higher of the two. So that's how all that works. The bottom line is there's a good chance that, again, if it doesn't apply to you, it applies to someone you know in terms of spousal or survivor benefits in the case of divorce. And it's probably just some help. And my guess is the ex-spouse isn't probably going to help them navigate that situation. Elaine, did you have a question?
No, I just didn't lower my hand. Sorry.
Oh, I just saw it. That's okay. All good. All good. Good to hear your voice again. So I'm going to finish up with taxes, and then we're going to land this plane. So first of all, I'm going to strongly exercise my I am not a tax professional clause here. But the bottom line is, and this is sometimes a misconception, Social Security is taxable. And they come up with this goofy number called provisional income, and it's half of your Social Security benefits plus your modified adjusted gross income. And if that number is in excess of $44,000 and you're filing jointly, then it's very likely that up to 85% of your Social Security benefits are going to be taxable. And because I'm a positive person, I like to think of that as you're going to get 15% of your Social Security benefits tax-free. The other 85% are likely to be taxed. So it's kind of a shame that they're taxed because it kind of feels like a tax on a tax in some ways. But I would say take that up with your Congress people. And in the meantime, I believe you are safe from California state tax in this regard, and I would defer that to Steve, Brian, and Luke as well. So I just want to close up by number one, saying thank you again for the opportunity to speak. Thanks to the folks at Lifetime for inviting me, and for all of you for listening to me here for about an hour. And I would strongly encourage you to set up time with your advisor at Lifetime in order to maybe ask them some questions that you had on this call, but maybe didn't get to ask me, but also, and very specifically, to run the scenario and the best strategy for you in your situation, because this can play a really important part of a financial plan if you think about it the right way. It's going to be important regardless, but the question is, are you going to be able to maximize it to the best of your ability? And I think you're far better equipped to do that. I hope you are after this presentation than before. So thank you again, and I hope you all have a great rest of the week.
Great, Tim. Thank you for, oh my gosh, all your knowledge. It's difficult to present just by yourself without any other audience or smiles or nods along the way. So that's, you did a great job there too. I just say two things. One, it is imperative everybody does sign up at that ssa.gov, create your own account. There's been a ton of fraud. And also, if you've not yet taken Social Security, it makes sense for you to go online. That way no one else can. Also, if you have kids, one thing we've seen also, children, someone's assumed their Social Security number. You would never know, the kids are not working. So that is very, very wise, very smart to do that. Also, this year, they've realigned the statements. They've made a huge statement change, first time in probably 25 years. So new and improved. So please do that. Also, we're in the retirement planning business and helping people design strategies. When you have a Social Security benefit of $3,000 a month, people say, that's not that important. Brian, Steve, I'm Steve, there's Brian, know this for a fact that what does it take to generate $3,000 a month? Well, if you have to invest your own money, that's $900,000 at a 4% distribution rate. So a lot of people tend to kind of poo-poo Social Security, whatever. We're always pushing people to hang in there and get that number big, because again, it's what you can get. 5,000 combined, it needs $1.5 million to generate $5,000 a month, 60,000 a year. So I think we've really sounded the alarm with Social Security. That's nothing to disregard or disrespect. It is a huge component of our overall retirement strategy. We call it mailbox money. It will be there. So just a couple other things came up. I spoke to a couple of clients beforehand. So Mr. Guru, somebody is at full retirement age, and they take Social Security benefits maybe for a year or so. Then they get a work gig and they earn some money, let's say between 67, 68 through 70. Would their check increase? You know, they're on Social Security, but they've made another, let's say 30, 40,000 a year for those last 68 to 70. Would they see an increase in their benefits a little bit? Or once you've got it in, no matter how much money you make afterwards, does that move the dial too much?
Oh, it does. It can, for sure. The short answer is yes, it will increase your benefits if your follow-on or subsequent earnings years knock out one of your best 35 years of work history. That's how it works. So that's the answer.
Got it. Got it. Okay, I think we have do we have one? Oh, this is a question from one of our clients. So what if the market isn't doing well? Is it better to take my Social Security now, that's basically guaranteed, than living off my investments short term? That's more of a timing, short-term, long-term question, which does come up when we have market volatility, and we certainly do qualify for that of late.
Oh, we absolutely do. And I think the answer depends on how severe the volatility is, you know, from where we were to start the year to about where we are. I would still say it probably makes sense to stick to the original plan. Some of it, this depends on just exactly how old you are too. If you're 65 versus 67, you're pretty close. You've already made it, you know, halfway through that early penalty period. If you're 62 and the original plan was 67, I might question it a bit more. In other words, how much do you need to stress the plan you had originally made in order to preserve the investments, in other words? And ultimately, as much as I have an opinion on this, perhaps it would be kind of number one person's opinion, number two, not involved at all or with knowledge of any of your situations. And number three, I think not as qualified as Brian's or Steve's, which is really the intersection of, you know, planning around Social Security and your investments. And so it's a bit of a non-answer, forgive me, but ultimately some of it depends on just how old you are and how close you are to the collection decision, as well as really how bad volatility is, because volatility can take many forms. We're not in a 2008 environment, in our opinion, but that would be a volatile environment, just as this is a volatile environment, but just of different magnitudes.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim. Okay, there's a second question coming in. Question. Since we are close in age, husband and wife, 2 years apart, is it better to have the Social Security once or past? Okay, say what
the Social Security talk. Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, they're close in age. So how would you answer that question?
Well, I think if you're younger than 62, I think in my opinion, you want to start to like think about this in the back of your mind in your mid to late 50s, and you want to start to move it to the front of your mind in your early 60s. And you probably want to have a plan on paper once you're eligible to begin collecting. That's how I always think of it. It may mean that you wait until 70, but it's like, yeah, I know it's something I should think about in your 50s. I'm thinking about it now to let's sit down and just put together a plan for how does this play into the rest of the plan. I think that starts or happens sometime around your 62nd birthday.
Correct. And also depends on who qualified for whose benefits higher. You may be similar age, but if she did better than he did or vice versa, because that's really the final determiner of a joint life and, you know, sort of the survivor who gets what. So the person who's made the most amount of money, we really want to encourage that person to keep going because of the spousal benefit plus survivor. That's what's going to go on. So we look at this whole longevity situation very seriously. And these are big decisions, but we've got a lot of clients who are age 100. I cannot believe how many people are age 90. 80's the new 50. It's like crazy. So America's aging for sure. And Brian and I are not, of course, but we definitely see that in treating everybody.
So Tim, there's a question that I get quite a bit, which I know there was a slide that you presented that had the notion of tapping into Social Security, being a burden at the house, going back to work in some capacity in one way, shape, or form. Can you talk a little bit about somebody that has both a pension, right, and their 40 quarters of Social Security in, and how that might affect it? Is it affected in the same material way? Is money, or is a pension different than going back to work and having W-2 or 1099 income?
So if you're prior to full retirement age and you turn on your Social Security benefits and you have a pension, you have no problem there. This earnings test is really about earned income, number one. The question within the question there, though, is also what type of pension do you have? In other words, is it a private sector pension or a public pension? If it's a public pension, you're going to be subject to, and by the way, a public pension could be further defined as because you worked there, you did not pay FICA tax. That's really the technical definition, because there are also public entities you could work at where you do pay that, in which case, for Social Security purposes, it wouldn't apply. What I'm about to say wouldn't apply. But what I'm talking about here is, of course, the government pension offset. So in other words, if you have both a government pension and part of the funding of that was not paying Social Security taxes, but then you also have private sector work later in your life or earlier in your life, and thereby you have Social Security expectations as well, they're going to take 2/3 of your government pension and reduce your Social Security by that amount. So in other words, if your government pension was $600 a month and your Social Security was $500 a month, they are going to take 2/3 of 600 or 400, and they are going to reduce your government or your Social Security of $500 a month by that amount. So in other words, you get $100 a month in Social Security net of what they call the government pension offset. It's basically a way to prevent kind of, I guess you could say, double dipping the system. Nobody likes it, but it's a fact and one of the rules that we have to live by. So a little bit of a broader answer probably than you were asking for there, Brian, but hopefully that helps.
No, that's
Earned
great.
income, though, that's the first most important. So dividends, interest, pensions don't count.
Not applicable, right? Yeah.
Excellent, excellent.
Correct.
Well, it's about that bewitching hour. So any question, I do encourage you to reach out to your advisor here at Lifetime, be it myself or Brian or David or Luke, and always happy to help and serve you. But Tim, thank you so much for your time and your expertise and your partnership with us. It's appreciated.
Yep. Thank you, Tim.
My pleasure. Thank you all
All right.
very much.
Have a good day, everybody.